Welcome to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. I'm Matthew of castingacross.com, where I explore the quarry and culture of fly fishing. This is the 339th episode of the podcast, and today we're talking about how you can develop your skills as a guide, even if you have no designs on ever earning a dollar taking people fishing. There are some good reasons to have some guide skills. We'll talk about that today. But before we get to that, I did want to mention that next episode is going to be another accusations podcast, which means I need your feedback. I need your questions. Let me know. Matthew at castingacross.com. Is there a question about fly fishing in general, a comment about something I've talked about or written about, or an accusation about something that I have brought up on the podcast? Do let me know. Matthew at castingacross.com. So I am not a guide, not licensed, not earning any income on it. I have in the past, for a couple of years in college, I did some guiding, just very part-time. It was kind of to supplement some other income I was making, but it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed it. I probably made some significant mistakes, as we all do in any line of work that we engage in, especially when we are new at it. But for me, it was a wonderful time to really see my strengths and to be exposed to my weaknesses when it came to not just fly fishing, but communication. And something I've talked about before on the podcast, specifically as it relates to finding a good guide. The best guides are not necessarily the people that can row you to the fish. The best guides are the people that can row you to the fish, and then they can communicate what you need to do, not only to catch that fish, but then in some way or another, communicate to you why you caught that fish. A good guide is someone who is going to make you a better angler, and you'll understand how that happened when the whole process is done. Now, that said, there's people that can help you catch lots of fish, and you're going to walk away saying, I caught a lot of fish, and I don't even know how that happened. But like I said, I think that the best guides are the ones that are good communicators who are doing more than just putting you on fish, but they're putting you on fish and helping you learn how to fish in general or in that specific body of water that they are guiding you on. So for me, that was really big. I'd been fly fishing for a number of years at that point in time. I'd sold fly gear. I'd done some instruction, but there's very, very big differences in between those things, almost like the classroom versus being out and practically doing it. And that became very clear to me as I was guiding people for smallmouth bass, of all things, that I had to really be very, very deliberate in articulating what we were doing, why we were doing it, and then helping them see what they need to do to change how they were fishing and how they were maybe not catching fish, and getting them to the point where they could do what I wanted them to do, which is, a lot more nuanced than grabbing their rod and saying, do what I'm doing, and doing it, and hooking a fish for your client, which is definitely not the way you want to go about it. So this is actually something I've thought about for a few reasons. One was everything I just said. The other one is that I was more or less guiding my son for the last few days. We had a special trip, something I'm sure we'll talk about later on the podcast in the next couple episodes. But we went down to Pennsylvania and we went fishing, and my goal was to put him on a bunch of different fish in a bunch of different situations so that he could experience a lot of the things that I experienced when I was a new fly fisher. He is an accomplished outdoorsman, super excited in all things hunting and fishing and hiking and woodsmanshipping. But he wanted to fish in the places I grew up fishing in, and I wanted him to have that experience. And so I bought a license and I brought rods, but I would say out of all the time we were fishing over those 3 days, I probably was only casting for maybe about 25%. The rest of the time, I was trying to put him on fish, and it was so much fun, and I had so much fun doing it. And this is one of those things that, again, this is a little bit of a side the point, but you can appreciate why a good guide likes what he or she does, and it's because the joy I had from watching not just my son, but my son is kind of the guy I was guiding succeed in what he was intending to do was really, really close, and in some ways surpassed the joy that I get from catching a fish myself. And that's not one of those things that you'll really grasp until you do it. But it is true. And so I had the double benefit of it being my son having these experiences, but then also being the young man I was kind of, picking the pattern, tying on the fly, showing him where to cast, and then having him execute it with a little bit of help and in guidance, and then him making it all come to fruition. Awesome experience. In some ways, like I said, exceeds the joy I got from catching fish myself. I mean, I caught fish this over the last few days, but those fish are so far back in my mind compared to the fish that he caught. So what I was going to talk about today, and I kind of foresee this as being maybe an ongoing series of things that I can bring to the forefront of your attention that you may very well use as you help others fly fish. I know that's one of kind of my stated goals with the podcast, is giving you, if you are an experienced angler, the language and the concept that you can then convey to somebody else. But then also, if you yourself are still learning, as we all are, these are some things to pay attention to yourself. So in this sense, I'm your guide from hundreds or thousands of miles away, and hopefully you're not listening to me while you're on the stream. But I want to talk through some practical things that you can pay attention to if you're fishing or if you're helping somebody else fish. And the very first one that I think is important is to help people understand how water refracts light. So at the most basic level, because I'm not going to talk science because that's not my thing, understanding that if you see a fish or if you see a spot where a fish is, that your casts have to compensate, or more importantly, your presentation has to compensate for the way that the depth, the current, and the refraction of light works. So this was something that we encountered quite frequently where he would make a very, very good cast, and it looked like the strike indicator was going over top of where fish were lying, but because of the refraction of light and because of the angle that we were at, that fly was probably a good 18 inches closer to us than we wanted it to be. Now, that's not to say fish aren't going to move to take that fly, but when the intention is putting that fly over the fish, that's something that you need to be cognizant of for the person you're helping or for yourself. And there's a couple of good ways to do this. One is to do a simple illustration by putting a stick in the water and watching how that stick looks like it bends. I mean, we've all done that. We've all seen that. We've all encountered that when we're in a pool or when we're, splashing around in a creek or something like that. But there's a disconnect with the science side of our brain and the practical side of our brain, especially when we are fishing. And if we spot a fish, and that can be to either the detriment of our good presentation or the detriment of casting to that fish and spooking it. So that's one good thing to pay attention to for yourself and for other people that you're helping, because that can be a very frustrating thing of not understanding where that fly is actually going. There's so many other variables to take into account, but to help illustrate how depth and how your perspective influences where that fly actually is in relation to where you are and what you are seeing is such an important thing to communicate to someone. Now, that's true with fishing nymphs. That's true with fishing streamers for trout. That's true for fishing streamers for bass and things like that. You really need to have a good grasp on where that fly is. Now, another aspect of that is where a nymph is under an indicator. This is one of those things that I think the best way to do it, and I talked about this with nymphing confidence a few weeks ago, is to let that fly drift past you. So my favorite thing to think about personally, but then as I'm communicating to other people how to fish nymphs using an indicator, is that at any possible time, you can get a visual cue on where that nymph is, either because maybe it has a light color, it has a hot spot, it has a bright bead, it has some flash to it, or you're in clear enough water where you can actually see that relatively drab nymph. Watch that and not the strike indicator, because there's two different things happening, especially if you have, 18, 24 inches between your strike indicator and your fly. There's a lot of things that can be happening to your strike indicator that have no bearing on what's happening to the fly, and vice versa. And so whatever you can do, try to make your focal point that fly. Now, whether it's because your cast and your presentation are further out, or whether because the water is off color, or whether because you have a very, very small fly that's riding very deep, then there are some times, as we all know, when there's no way to have a visual, lock on that fly. But you can kind of have it, allow your eyes to do two things. And this is one of those things that I think a lot of us do by just by default after we've been fly fishing for a while, but to keep an eye on the strike indicator, but then pay attention to where that fly should be. Now, going back to what I said a few weeks ago with nymphing confidence, how do you figure that out? You let that entire rig drift by you. So you cast upstream and you allow that indicator to come as close to you as possible. And then you try to get that visual key on that fly that's trailing and bouncing. Now, this does a few things for you. One, you can realize, oh, shoot, I don't have enough weight on, or I don't have enough length between my strike indicator and my fly. Or maybe the fly is riding funny in the water or something like that. And that is a good opportunity to make that change at that point, as opposed to making dozens of casts without knowing that information, and your fly is nowhere near where you want to be presenting to the fish. So once you do that, then you can kind of have that idea of, okay, if I've got 24 inches of tippet between my indicator and my fly, the fly is riding maybe about 12 inches deep at the speed of the current that's right in front of me. The current that I'm presenting in is relatively similar, so the fly should be riding at a relatively similar place in the water column. That means I need to move my indicator up another foot if I want to get maybe another 6 inches or so of depth on that fly. And so communicating that to yourself, knowing that, and training yourself to look for that fly, look where that fly should be, because even if you can't see that fly, you can see a swirl or you can see a flash. And a lot of times that's going to happen even before the indicator moves, or it's going to happen and it's not going to impact the indicator depending on the flow. So this is one of those things that if you are helping somebody fish, there's like multiple variables that you're going to have to articulate, but you're going to try to prioritize. And this is a big thing that I like to stress to new anglers. You really have to triage the situation. If you are really having a hard time casting a multi-nymph rig or an indicator rig, right now that needs to be the focus. And I'm not going to say, okay, and make your cast. All right, now watch your indicator. Okay, now watch the fly that's probably something like 24 inches behind and 12 inches down from the indicator, and also watch for flashes. No, what I start with is make your cast. And if I see a fish take, then I say set, or I say take it, something to that effect, just to get them to go. That way, I'm not overloading them with information. Now, one of the cool things is fishing this way, you're going to catch fish by accident. You're going to have fish take that fly so hard they hook themselves. You're going to have that strike indicator do what a lot of us use it for and act like a bobber and give a very, very clear indication that there's a fish on the end of the hook. But you're not going to want to overwhelm somebody and give them all these pieces of information right off the bat. You're going to want to make sure that you give them piece by piece. So once that cast and that presentation is down, you're making sure that that fly is landing beyond the indicator so that it actually swings into place, as opposed to maybe the indicator flowing over the fly. And you're just giving it piece by piece. Make your presentation. All right, now watch that indicator. Watch what it does and over communicate. Now, some people that you work with are going to want you to stay quiet. I get that. But a lot of times, especially if you're not doing this vocationally, if someone says, "Hey, I know you fly fish. Will you take me and show me how to do it?" Then over communicate. Don't be spazzy about it. Don't be intense, but just walk through. Okay, now see how this indicator is moving over this stretch of water. See those little movements that are happening right now. That's simply the current moving that indicator. That's nothing to be, pay attention to. If in fact that's actually good, because if that indicator was moving at a different clip or is moving kind of horizontally across the water, then that would be drag. Then you explain what drag is. But then once you see things happen where the indicator is bouncing, and say, okay, that kind of gentle bounce, look at it. It's still moving downstream, but that shows that fly is dancing on the bottom. That's good, because that's where the fish are going to be. That kind of stuff. Over communicate in a calm, kind of patient way. Ask questions. Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you see what that is? What's happening right there? Now, this might be overkill, and you might say, I never want to go fishing with Matt. This sounds really, really intense. But you're talking hours and hours and hours on the stream, and this is the kind of thing where these things will come intuitively over time, or you can give someone a leg up and really walk through these pieces with them. The next thing that I like to do for myself, and there's a lot of like self-talk on this one, is check leader and tippet and fly, and again, let's just say strike indicator or multi-fly rig often. So as you pay attention to your cast, we can become so singularly focused on getting that fly to that fish that we overlook some very, very detrimental and dangerous parts of fishing. And this manifests in a few ways. One, we can cast and cast and cast and then realize, you know what, I snagged a tree and pulled that fly out, or I thought I pulled that fly out about 15 minutes ago, and I just reeled in and there's no fly. How long was I fishing with no fly? Or you get a little wind knot, and because you had to make kind of a tricky cast, or the wind came up, or you just let that thing drop a little bit, and it tailing looped on itself and created a little overhand knot. And now you have a whole lot of risk built into that leader because you have a knot down in the tippet. So those are the kind of things that you need to break your habit of casting and not stopping frequently. I like to not go more than a dozen casts without just doing a quick cursory inspection of my rig, especially when I'm fishing a multi-fly rig or I'm fishing with a larger indicator. Because even with a good cast, you have the risk of things swirling on themselves, things tangling up, line twist getting involved. And once you introduce a little bit of line twist and you have a second fly, now things start to get to the point where, best case scenario, you just have to stop and untwist things. Worst case scenario, you have knots in your tippet. Now, tippet material is not expensive. It's not a problem to tie a new, length of 3X and 4X and 5X on, reattach your fly, put a new strike indicator. The problem is when you're casting that way, maybe even just a couple of times, and you hook a fish, and now you have a compromised leader and tippet, and you're going to say, how in the world does this thing snap 4 inches up from where my fly was? I know I had an 18-inch length of tippet on there, and there's this random snap. Well, there may have been a wind knot there. Sure, there's other things that could have happened. It could have been frayed from rubbing against something. It could have just been compromised in some other manner. But a lot of times, it's probably because there is a little wind knot in that point, and that is the easy breaking point. A great way to illustrate that is to take a length of tippet and show how strong it is, and then tie a simple wind knot in it, cinch it down real tight, then have somebody pull on it, and it shows how much strength that line loses. Mono, fluoro, you name it, especially when you get down to the trout tippets, how easily those things snap. And so it's very, very frustrating, but it's also a lot easier to fix the problems when it is a little bit of line twist. Fix the problem when it is one little overhand wind knot. And as you get up until like 3X, 2X, there's a good chance that if you use an eye cleaner that you have on your nippers, or even just a hook, and you're very careful, you can probably pull that thing apart and then give it a nice test. And especially get to like 3X, 2X, 1X up into the butt section of your leader, that's not going to be too terribly compromised for most trout fishing. And it's easier and faster to do that than to have to retie an entire leader. So don't feel bad with saying, hey, swing that over to me real quick. And before they make their next cast, you just run your hand down and make sure the knots that you're feeling are the surgeon's loops, or the blood knots that you've put in there, and that the fly isn't hung up. That's another simple thing. How a larger bodied fly the hook could get entangled into the line. Just little quick, easy things that you can do that will make sure that you're not spending too much time tying knots and untangling. Because most bad tangles don't happen instantaneously. They happen because you've got a minor tangle, and then that gets compounded by another bad cast. So a few things, and all those, come to think of it, again, this goes back to my experiences last few days, are very nymph focused. We're talking about making that presentation in such a way that you understand where that fly is in relation to the fish or the lie. So from kind of big picture perspective, you understand perspective. And then secondly, where that fly is in relation to the indicator, and then communicating what that indicator does, and just paying attention. Indicators can be crutches for new anglers and for experienced anglers, but using that indicator in a way such that it is helping your fishing and helping you be more honed in on what's happening on top of the surface of the water and underneath the water is a really, really good thing to do. And then thirdly, really taking your time to make sure that when a cast seems a little bit wonky, use your intuition. I think you'd be surprised how often there is a small line twist or tangle when you say, something felt a little bit honky in that cast. Something just didn't feel great. And you pull that thing up and you say, yes, it's a quick little wind knot. Let's undo that. And we're back to fishing. All right. So that's 3 things that I'm not going to call them guide skills. I think they're just basic common sense, fly fishing things, but they're the kind of things that you can certainly do very well to communicate to a new angler if you're helping them fish. But they're also the kind of things that you are going to want to speak to yourself over and over and over again. Why? We get tired. And I guess that's my last one is pay attention to body language. Pay attention to where is their elbow when they are drifting a fly, dry fly, or a nymph. Is it down by their side, or are they out in more of a ready position? Where's their rod tip when they're drifting? After 3 or 4 hours, especially if there's not a lot of action, then you have the tendency to kind of drop your entire posture. And although there's nothing wrong with being relaxed when you're fly fishing, you do make yourself less ready to hook that fish, respond to that strike if you are slouched down, if that rod tip is closer to the water. So those are little things to pay attention to, and it might be a little obnoxious to say, yep, rod tip up, stand up, get your elbow out. But all of those things, if done well, done with that bedside manner of a good guide, are going to be helpful to that person. And they're going to be things that we need to preach to ourselves. I say that to myself all the time. Matt, keep your rod tip up. Keep your rod tip up. Matt, bring that fly in, double check it. Don't just assume that there's not a knot because you don't want there to be a knot. My flies don't care about my feelings. I need to bring them in and check them out. So there's a handful of things that hopefully a good guide would tell you, but something that you can guide a friend, or you can guide a child, or you can just, if somebody is asking for your help, these are things that you can help them with, but they're also things that you can remind yourself of as you are out on the water. Is there something that falls in this category? Let me know. Matthew@castingacross.com. Something maybe that you have employed as you have helped somebody fish, or if you are or have been a professional guide, like this is the one absolute thing. But those were some of the things that just on one morning of this last trip, my son and I focused on, and they were helpful for him, but they're helpful for me to remind myself as I'm fishing to pay attention to these things, not get lazy, and really focus on the fundamentals. This week on Casting Across, the first article is called Boiled Frogs and Fly Fishing. Now, no frogs were harmed in the production of this post, but this is a little bit of a narrative post. Check it out. Hopefully you enjoy it. Boiled Frogs and Fly Fishing. Short read. And then Wednesday was another book review called Learning to Take Smallmouth Seriously. And here I review Fly Fishing for Smallmouth Bass by Harry Murray. So Harry Murray is a Virginia angler and fly shop proprietor. And this book, Fly Fishing for Smallmouth Bass, is really, really good. And the kind of the thesis of my review is you can't fish for smallmouth like you're fishing for just warm water fish. They are a much more nuanced fish that a well-rounded approach to smallmouth bass, particularly in moving water, entails a more trout-like angling approach than it does like you're fishing for a largemouth bass. And that might be something that you've known for a long time, or that might be something that is relatively new to you. But this is a great book, Fly Fishing for Smallmouth Bass, that will give you what you need to make that happen. This week's recommendation on the podcast. It's something I've recommended before, but I'm going to do it again. It is Sunrise Silver Mirror lenses from Costa Del Mar. So what is the Sunrise Silver Mirror lens, you may ask? It is their lens that they want to put on your face for when it is overcast, first thing in the morning, last thing at night. So I am a huge fan of these lenses. I love Costa's glass lenses, period. But I had a couple of really, really dark mornings and evenings and then overcast days recently on the water. And I kept my sunglasses on the entire time. It was interesting looking at anglers up and down the river, had their sunglasses either up on their hat brim or down, dangling from a retainer in front of them. And they were missing out on that polarization because they probably had on, darker lenses, which are awesome in bright light. I've got the sun beaming in my window right now. I would need something like a darker lens, a blue or a green or an amber or something like that. But when it is overcast, it is so clutch to be able to get the benefits of that glare reduction, as well as that polarization, and of course protecting your eyes. That you can't overstate that. So I'm going to put a link to all of the sunrise silver mirror frames that they have over at Costa Del Mar. They're not inexpensive sunglasses, but you can get a pair for under $200, and of course they go up much, much higher than that. And I'm sure you can find another brand that makes something like this. I know that they're out there, but for my money, I want something that's going to protect my eye and give me long-lasting durability. So I'm happy with the glass. So you can check out that link over at the show notes for this podcast page over at castingacross.com. Thanks for listening to the Casting Across Fly Fishing Podcast. Please subscribe in your favorite podcast app, then rate and review the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Then head over to castingacross.com for 3 posts a week on the people, places, and things that go into the pursuit of fish.